Hey buds, what's up? Welcome back to Wake Up Wednesday with Nat. I'm Nat, and today we're continuing our discussion on the realness of working on your relationship, specifically your romantic relationship. So whether you're married or in a long-term committed relationship, this is the place for you. This is part 5 of our 5-part series. So we've made it to the last tactic that we're going to be talking about today. If you haven't watched parts 1 through 4, I will drop the links down below so that you can access them. I highly encourage you to watch them. We talked about some pretty good things. So let's get right to it. Look, relationships can be very, very challenging, but they can also be remarkably rewarding and fulfilling and re-energizing if we give it the time and attention that it so deserves. So even though they can be challenging, even though we can get frustrated, even though we can be hurt by our partner, we can hurt our partner, we can just feel like we're stuck in a rut and we're so far into a relationship and you don't know how to make it any better, that doesn't mean you should be ready to throw in the towel. Today in part 5, we're talking about seeking counseling. So we talked about communication, but like for real communication and some tactics on how to do that successfully. We've talked about in part 2, we talked about focusing on the positive. So in a practical way, not a way that just like sweeps everything under the rug and pretends everything is hunky-dory and we don't have issues or challenges to overcome, but how to focus on a positive in a way that really energizes our relationship and helps it to set it on a more healthy course. In part 3, we talked about forgiveness. Whew, that one is a big one. We talked about prioritizing time for each other and prioritizing each other in part 4. And today, part 5 is seeking counseling. Look, we may have gone through all of these other areas, and I understand that we've done this over the course of 5 weeks, and working on a relationship is going to take a long time. However, if you are feeling like you've already been putting in the work and you're still struggling yourself or with your partner, maybe it's time to seek counseling. Ain't no shame in seeking counseling. In fact, research shows that that professional help, so seeking like couples counseling, positively impacts 70% of those that seek out the treatment. And in fact, it shows that those that do seek the professional help, that is really what makes the difference between either making it for the long haul and having a thriving relationship or becoming a divorce statistic. Divorces are high. They've been high now for what, maybe 5-10 years? I know my marriage was struggling 6 years ago. So I would say between 5 and 10 years, like the divorce rate just keeps going up and up and up. Folks get divorced like changing underwear. Like it's not a big decision. It's not a big deal. We get married today. We get divorced by the end of the year if we just didn't mash. And if you're here thinking I'm gonna give you some quick relationship advice of like if steps 1 through 4 didn't work, like go ahead and bail. This isn't the channel for you. I'm not your girl. I really believe in trying and like making a dedicated effort to whatever it is that you have at hand, even if it's your own mental well-being, before moving on to the next step. So for me, I think that divorce, the big D word, is a final resort. It may be right for you in certain situations. I can't tell you that, but today we're talking about seeking counseling, and this might be the last resort before you call it quits. So hear me out on seeking counseling. I think this has been one of those areas that's taboo. Couples don't want to talk about it. They certainly don't want to do it. My husband and I did couples counseling for a full year. Independently, I also did my own counseling. So I was working on myself, and then we were working specifically on the relationship together for a full year. That was about 6 years ago, but here we are 6 years later, going strong. We've been together for 10 years, and the couples counseling really made a difference. It wasn't the end all be all. It wasn't like what made or would make or break us. Anyway, but it was a step in the right direction for us. And then like the work really started. So we both still had to be committed to taking the action steps and like having the real conversations with our therapist. But that being said, I think everybody could use therapy. Like, I think it's a good thing to have. I'm not a fan of like just being in therapy for 10 years and like nothing changes. Like, I think if that's your situation, whether it's couples counseling or individual, you may want to rethink your therapist. You may really want to reflect on what you're doing. and then like figure out why you're like, but you've been in therapy for 10 years. Like no one should just be in therapy for 10 years and like nothing is changing. So, that being said, we're talking about seeking counseling today. So that's what we chose to do. Our relationship was really at that point of like, it's going to go one of two ways, really almost one way. We were like getting ready to just call it quits. We got into therapy and we started doing the work. So I think what I want to talk about today specifically around seeking counseling is to give it a chance. Have that conversation with your spouse. Like you can't force the other person. And one key thing to keep in mind is that if you're feeling like you're like the only one trying and the only one that like doesn't have the issues and it's really them, and if you could just get them in to see a professional, like everything will change. That's not true. Both parties need to be at least somewhat of a willing participant. I was willing. I didn't buy it. I didn't think it would work, to be completely honest. That's where my mindset was at the time in my life then. But I was willing to go and knew that we both had things to work on, and my husband felt the same. So that's a big one. I've had friends, I've had personal friends who like drag their significant other, their spouse to therapy thinking that like the therapist is just gonna fix them and work on all of their issues. And like, then I'm gonna be good, man. Like the therapist is gonna agree with me. They're gonna, no, nope. It takes two to tango. That's a saying for a reason, y'all. So just know that that seeking counseling could be a last resort, but you can't force somebody to get there. And that's a conversation, a decision that you have to make with your spouse. But it is a great resource. It will help in a lot of ways. It will get you to at least talk more openly. It will teach you new skills, and you'll have somebody to check in with that's like a neutral party, right? Because you don't want to like talk to your parents about this. In a lot of cases, like even if your close friends know about what's going on, like there's bias in those relationships. That the therapist for the most part is just like this neutral person that's there to listen and like give you their feedback based on what they're observing. So I've had friends that have had success from therapy. I've had friends that have been in a situation where it didn't work for them, but because specifically the one person was telling me, well, like they're not doing this and the therapist isn't like, it's not about the spouse. It's about both of you guys together. So you have to kind of separate that and be open to working on yourself too. And not just your partner, because they're not the only reason that your relationship is having issues. So let's talk about if you get into therapy. Let's talk about if you get into therapy and you're feeling like you're not really making progress. It's okay to decide that maybe your therapist that you selected isn't a match for you. It's okay to decide that they just don't really get it, or maybe you just don't get them, you don't click, you're not really comfortable talking to them. You can change and switch to another therapist. There's no shortage of therapists. I would probably say that there might be a shortage of good therapists, but that doesn't mean that if like you try the first couple and it's just nothing's working, don't be afraid to find another one. I had a friend who they actually had this is like the therapy gone wrong, where the therapist was siding with their spouse, and it like they felt almost ganged up on by the spouse and the therapist. Like they were like the same person and they could relate. And the therapist was like, yeah, I do that. And I think that like, no, like that's not the therapist's job. They're supposed to remain like pretty neutral. And if you're feeling ganged up by your husband or your wife and the therapist, like that's a red flag that you need to find someone else. So don't be afraid. Don't just throw in the towel on therapy either, is my point here. It could take a little bit of trial and error to find one that you click with, that you feel is actually doing a good job. And that, and then just give that some time to know that like, just because you do a few months of therapy, that it's going to change everything. The real work is when you're back home. And that's where these other things that we've been talking about will come into play. You can find a book, you can find a podcast, you can find someone that's like specifically just focusing it and an expert in this arena. I'm not an expert on just relationships. So there are a lot of things that you can do and choose from, but knowing that seeking counseling, that there's no shame in it, really shouldn't be any more stigma. I encourage you to talk about it with your significant other, see if they're open to it. Talk about it with your friends that you all are doing it, and just like, surround yourself with community and support. You'd be amazed at how understanding, once you open up, you know, your friend or your coworker, somebody might say, man, I thought I was the only one. Like, we've been struggling with this, and this. And all of a sudden, you also have like a built-in support system in something that can be a very trying time. I say go for it. If that's might be your last resort, go into it with an open mind. Remember that you can't force the other person. Remember that you will also have to do some work on yourself. Your relationship didn't get to wherever it's at because of your spouse. You played a part in it too. And so you've got to be open to continuing to work on yourself. Wake up to the fact that you are responsible for your actions as well. I hope you find this useful. I say this to say that couples counseling can really work wonders on your relationship, and it can really be the difference between you getting a divorce or staying in your marriage, but having a happy and completely different marriage. My marriage to my husband is completely different than it was 6, 7, even 10 years ago when we first met. And it's because we chose to do the work. Therapy helps guide that. The work ultimately was up to us. So I encourage you to go back to some of the parts that we looked at, focus on the positives, go back and watch a part. Focus on the positives was part 2. Go back and watch that one. The homework assignment there was for you to remember your first date, your first, 1, 2, or 3 dates with your significant other, and how it made you feel, how you felt alive and nervous and excited, and just you couldn't wait to be around them, and you couldn't wait for your elbows to touch, and all of those things. Remember, it's all still there. You all are, at your core, like maybe the same people. Things have you've grown, you've evolved, things have changed, demands on your life have changed, but you remember some of that stuff. It'll help. Dedicate time to each other, to love each other, to hug each other, to just be with each other, to say, you know what, like, we are having a hard time right now, but I choose you. I choose this. I want to be with you, and we're going to make it work. It's a game changer. It is a game changer. I'm excited to hear what you thought about this series. Anything else you might want to hear about, we can talk about relationships again in the future. But I hope you at least find this useful. And remember, whatever you all are going through, it will pass. Other people are out there too. You're not the only ones, and it will get better. It will get better, even if at the end of it you do have to call it quits and get a divorce. You'll survive. You will make it through. But give it your all. Know that you really worked for your relationship, yourself, your loved ones, your family. Know that you really put in all of the effort, and you gave it patience and grace and kindness and compassion, and that for yourself as well. And you'll see things change. I guarantee it. I love you. I see you. I care about you. I believe in you. And until next time, have an incredible week. Bye, buds.